Good afternoon, students. It's Mrs. Cindy here, and today we're going to talk about looking inside the cells. So we've been talking about microscopes, and we've seen images of just the kind of the cell membrane, the cytoplasm, and the nucleus, and now it's time to look inside them. So first things first, let's talk about all the vocabulary that you'll be learning. Vocabulary for this unit is this list right here. These are some of the organelles and the name of all the organelles that you're going to know. And so that's why on your handout I have this listed as well, so you can see this and then maybe use this as a flashcard or something like that. But just some introductory information for you here. Now, one thing I need to point out is that there are many different types of cells. So the one that we see, the one that we'll be seeing images of, are kind of your classic animal cell, your classic plant cell. But it's important to note that there are lots of different cells, like this nerve cell, which has a long axon right here. It will look very different. Gland cells look very different. Blood cells, all the different types of blood cells look extremely different. A bone cell, your reproductive cells, the different muscle cells, they all look different because they all have very different functions, and so they need to be just look different. Okay, so we will talk about your generic animal cell, your generic plant cell, and you'll be seeing a diagram of that. But please note that is it's kind of the overall design of a cell. But then when we get into physiology next year, when we start talking about the different organ systems, we'll be looking at the different types of muscles that make up those tissues, that make up those organ systems. And so it will look different. So your first set of vocabulary here is talking about different organisms that are made up of different types of cells, and whether or not they have many cells that make up the tissues that make up the organs, or if they are just made up of one cell. So this is 3 different organisms that are called unicellular. Okay, uni, like the United States, one set of states. So unicellular means, oops, sorry, I'm not changing my notes here. Unicellular means any single-celled organism. Just want to stay on. Okay, so these are examples of unicellular organisms. Okay, and contrary, on the opposite side of that, multicellular organisms are organisms made up of many different types of cells. So organism made of many cells. Okay, so that's a multicellular organism. We are multicellular. Anything really, we can't even see these guys. You have to look at these, the amoeba, the paramecium, under a microscope. That's the only way that you can see them. That's your first indication that you're dealing with a unicellular. If you can really see the organism, be it a plant or a person or an animal, then chances are they are basically guaranteed to be multicellular, unless you've discovered a new type of organism. So let's test ourselves and make sure that we know the difference. So this guy right here, you can see it. It's a fish, and so it's multicellular. This one under a microscope, unicellular. The manatee, multicellular. This bacteria, each of these little capsules is one bacteria, one organism of a bacteria. So that would be unicellular because it's a cell, and we'll talk about bacteria and kind of what they look like, which is really cool. Here's that paramecium, unicellular. Here's a plant, many different. You can see it. It looks great, multicellular. The worm is also multicellular, and a skunk, multicellular. Okay. So the next point, multicellular organisms, they have a lot of cells, and so those cells have to be coordinated, and they need to be able to work together. The way and they also, they're fairly multicellular organisms are bigger. So we need to combine these cells so they can work together, so the different types of cells can work together into an organ, and then those organs can all work together to support the organism. So one thing I want to note is that, as I said, there are lots of different types of cells. So this type of cell may make this sort of tissue. There may be another cell over here that makes a different sort of tissue. Okay, that maybe has a different shape, blah, 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 blah. There may be another sort of cell here that makes up a different sort of tissue. And then all of these tissues come together into one organ, and then that organ then works together. It has those combined tissues, the combined type of cells that help the organ system actually work together. So this is a lung, and one lobe of the lung, and then we have the other, and then you have the whole respiratory system, which is what gets oxygen in and carbon dioxide out. And that's just one system of this. So just to let you know, it's not just one cell that makes up, again, all the different tissues. It's a lot of different cells. Sorry, I slipped a little there. So one type of cell does one type of job. Maybe something you want to have in your notes. It has one type of function. Okay. While another type of cell would have a different function. Okay. And then I like this example of how the hierarchy goes from, here's the whole school, which is a lot like the whole organism, and the whole school is made up of many different moving parts. Okay, so moving right along. These are specialized cells. This is an image from your book that I liked very much. Just again talks about the different types of cells and how they're used differently. For instance, here is the example of the nerve cells, the nervous system. The red right there. Here's a plant cell made to help manufacture food. Here's blood cells carrying oxygen. Here's a root tip of really any plant that has a root, and these cells are extending. So lots of different types of cells. So review of organization, just to remind us what all of these different things are. A tissue is a group of similar cells that perform similar functions. Okay, an organ, we'll change font here. Ooh, get crazy with the green, is made up of different tissues that work together. And an organ system, to change colors once again, is a group of organs that work together. An example organ systems would be that respiratory system, your skeletal system, your skeleton, your muscular system. Okay, lots of different systems. Okay, so let's move into, so we've been talking about the bigger part of the organism, but what makes up this tissue, right? What makes up the tissue? Let's talk about the cells, what makes different cells different. So let's learn about what is just in a generic cell, and then we can look at differentiated cells later. The two types of cells that we're going to talk about are plant cell and animal cell. This should have been kind of the overall image that you saw under the microscope during our microscope lab. So let's move on. So a plant cell has a cell wall. Okay, so big difference between a plant and animal cell is a plant cell has a cell wall. Okay, so here's the cell wall. Okay, and what it is it's a rigid wall made up of cellulose. And the purpose of it is to help, the reason why a plant cell has this is to help protect and support the overall structure of the plant itself. So a plant is that like woody stalk or a different stalk, so it needs to hold that shape. And because the plants don't have skeletons, they don't have those hard bones in them, they need another way in order to be rigid. And so the cell wall is what creates that for it. Okay, and these are the internal parts. One thing I want to note in this image right here is this right here is called the cell membrane, which both plants and animal cells have, but the plant cell has this added protection and support system called the cell wall. Okay, so now let's talk about what the cell membrane is. So the cell membrane, so an animal cell has a cell membrane, but also a plant cell has a cell membrane. Okay, and what the cell membrane is you want to think of it, is it is very much like a window. Okay, and I would say a screened window. That's so, so only certain things can get through that screen, okay? The screen lets things in, and the things here are going to be chemicals, really, slash compounds. They're really, everything is a chemical, so that's why I feel very comfortable saying chemicals. It lets things in and out on purpose. Okay, so it's a very purposeful membrane. We're going to do a lab called diffusion and osmosis, where we're going to have a membrane like this. Okay, it's going to be a semi-permeable, meaning that it's only going to allow certain things in and certain things out. That's so we can see what that's very much like. Okay, out on purpose is what I meant to say, on purpose. And then just to remind you, a plant cell has this too. A plant cell has this right inside. Plant cell has the membrane right on the inside of the wall. Sorry, I hear my kid talking. And then just to give us our next vocabulary word, I'll switch colors, but next vocabulary word is going to be organelle. Okay, and that's what we're looking at here. All of these different structures are known as organelles. Okay, so organelles are all the structures inside the cell. Okay, and they all have unique and fun functions, and that's what we're learning about from now on in this section. So we have the nucleus, okay, which is on the inside of the cell. That was one of the main things you could see. And so if we actually were to go back, what we're going to talk about in just on this slide is we're going to be talking about this right here, just that part right there. Okay, so we have the nucleus, we have the chromatin, and we have the nucleolus. Okay, so let's talk about all three of those things. The nucleus is the cell's control center. Okay, so this is where all the kind of all the functions, all the information comes from as far as what everything else is doing. You want to think about it as like Mrs. Poland's office, right? This is the control center, and everybody just kind of does what she asks us to do, right? And then you have chromatin, and this spindly stuff is the chromatin. Chromatin is actually made up of a whole bunch of strands of DNA, and believe me, you will know about DNA. So if you don't right now, it's coming. But the strands of DNA that have the instructions, or that are the instructions, really, the instructions, gosh, every time I talk I spell something wrong, which makes sense. Instructions of what to do, of what the cell should do. And then the nucleolus is where ribosomes are made. And of course, ribosomes doesn't mean anything to you now, but we're going to cover them in just a second. So just have faith in this. So the nucleolus is where ribosomes are made. Okay, so nucleolus, chromatin, which is DNA strands, and then the overall, this whole thing is the nucleus. In other images, you would see that this is a nuclear envelope, but this is what you need to know, those three vocabulary words. Okay, so now what are ribosomes? Ribosomes are the cell's protein factories. Yes, indeed. They make proteins is what that means. There can be free ribosomes, which are floating around just within the inside of the cell. There can also be ribosomes that are attached to the endoplasmic reticulum. And so this is a structure that we'll talk about in a second. But the endoplasmic reticulum, which is right here, okay, so this is endoplasmic reticulum is this thing right here, okay, all of this that's coming off of that nucleus, okay. What this does is the endoplasmic reticulum helps the ribosomes make proteins and other substances, but mainly proteins, okay. This right here is a ribosome. Okay, so this dot right here is a ribosome, and then if you look closer at it, this is what it looks like. It kind of is made out of two parts, a top part and a bottom part. This is a copy of the DNA that has come out of the chromatin, right? Come out of the nucleus. It's come out of the nucleus. And this is the instructions of what this is kind of like the sewing machine. And this sewing machine is attaching, okay, amino acids to each other to make a protein, okay? We're going to watch a video on this. When we get to this more specifically, we'll talk about this process of making proteins a little bit more specifically, but that's what a ribosome looks like. So it needs the instructions, right? It needs kind of the procedure, which it can only get from the DNA. And so this RNA is a copy because you never let the original copy out of the nucleus. So this is the copy of it. And then this is providing the instructions of which amino acid to put to sew or to connect to which amino acid. So it needs kind of that instruction. Okay, so that's so ribosomes, and then all you really need to know about the endoplasmic reticulum is it helps those ribosomes. It kind of provides a space and is able to pull all the necessary materials needed by the ribosome. So it just makes it a little bit easier. It's like a workspace. Okay, and then the cytoplasm, which should have probably been brought up way before, right? The cytoplasm is just what all these organelles are sitting in. And so it's often known as like a jelly substance. If you were making edible cells, you would use Jello if you were making it at home, because that's kind of the consistency of it. It is like this thick, goopy stuff. Or you would use a fruit roll-up, as that what you would put the things in. But the cytoplasm is a jelly-like or a gel-like substance that holds all the organelles in place. So it's not just air or a vacuum in here. There's a gel that the substance that holds the organelles in place. Okay, so cytoplasm is extremely important. Okay, so now we've talked about how the cell is actually functioning and it's working, and these ribosomes on the endoplasmic reticulum are really working hard. How is it getting the energy to do this? How is it possible that there's a factory? Well, the mitochondria, okay, is the place where all the energy comes from. Okay, so this is the mitochondria here, 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 and depending on the type of cell, that kind of determines how many mitochondria are necessary. This is what it looks like on the inside. It has these this cool ribbon-like structure, but and as you move into biology and cytology, you'll learn more about what is happening across these. But what the mitochondria does in general is it converts energy from food, hence why we must eat and eat healthfully all the time, into energy the cell must have to function. Okay, so that's what the mitochondria does for the cell. Okay, so it takes the energy that we've consumed and eaten and it turns it into energy for our cells to function and to produce the proteins and to produce the compounds that it needs to, or to perform the function it has to. So then the Golgi apparatus, which honestly looks very similar to the endoplasmic reticulum. So this is the endoplasmic reticulum. Okay, it's not always blue, we just color it. But this is the Golgi apparatus, and you can usually tell because it's all these envelopes, but then there's also little kind of balls that are coming on or off the Golgi apparatus, because this is known as the cell warehouse, where all the packaging happens, right? So this is the cell warehouse. So everything that's made, see this in the endoplasmic reticulum, and it moves here to the packaging plant. It then moves and then it goes either out of the cell or to another part of the cell. But the end of the Golgi apparatus is the cell warehouse, meaning that it receives newly made proteins or substances and ships them really packages them too. I didn't packages them and then ships them to where they need to go. Okay, so that's what the Golgi apparatus does. Golgi apparatus, not to be confused though with the endoplasmic reticulum. Now, also in this diagram, I want to mention the lysosome. Okay, the lysosome. Here's an example of a lysosome. This is known as the recycling center. I have another image for this, but this is known as the recycling center of a cell. So any kind of parts or any amino acids, anything that is not being used or needs to, or ends up, needing to go away, the lysosome helps break it down. And so in this image that I have next, it shows that there's a whole bunch of proteins and enzymes here that are used to help store or break down anything that's not usable at that time. Okay, so this is the lysosome, and they are also present in here. So endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus, and see how it has the all the little circles around it. Those are all the moving, that's like the moving trucks, right? So here's the warehouse, and then a truck goes in and a truck goes out. The next image, or the next thing I want you to see is a vacuole, and I want you to know that these are in, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you, lysosomes are only in animals. Did I tell you that? These are only in animals, Okay. Now, the vacuole is in both a plant and an animal, and one big difference is, if you see, here's a vacuole in the plant cell. It doesn't have to be that large. But then in the this is the animal cell. Sorry, in the plant cell, the vacuole is huge. Okay, it really takes up a lot of space. And so this vacuole and this vacuole, okay, these store water, food, waste, and other materials. Okay, and so it's pretty obvious why a plant cell really needs a vacuole and why it needs to be so large. And it's, of course, to store that excess water or energy that or food that it doesn't need at that point because it's it's too cold out, and so it's not growing. It's just kind of hibernating. And then the very last thing that you need to know is chloroplasts. Chloroplasts are in plant cells. So plant cells have the mitochondria to make energy, but it also needs to make its own, mitochondria is converting energy into energy usable in the cell. The chloroplast is green on purpose, and this is the reason why plant leaves are green. This is the type of this is the color that, well, actually, let's not get into that. But the color is purposeful, and but this is the interaction with the sunlight. Okay, it's the interaction with the sunlight, because these right here, okay, are the chloroplast converts sunlight into energy the cell can use. Okay, so plants only, of course, because we are not converting sunlight into energy, but plants need to do that, right? We eat the plants because they just did all this work for us because they have those chloroplasts. Okay, but again, endoplasmic reticulum, it has these little dots on them, meaning that it has the ribosomes, you have the mitochondria, you have the Golgi apparatus, the packaging plant, and then you have the free ribosomes, you have it all. Okay. Other images will give you more vocabulary terms that you need to know. These are the ones that you need to know for our class. Okay. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon, and I'll see you next time.